Woo! Look out.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our last session from the Do No Harm series, Understanding the Intersectional Experiences in Human Trafficking. And because we have so much work to do today, I will jump right into the land acknowledgement. And I want to say that where I'm speaking today is Takaronto. So I will do my land acknowledgement from Takaronto, but please feel free to use the chat box and tell us what lands you are joining in from today. So Takaronto has been a home to many nations since time immemorial. This include the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Those nations were harmed by the arrival of European settlers who have systematically tried to erase these indigenous communities and their teachings. Colonialism and racism are deeply entrenched in our Canadian state, and collaborative network to end exploitation strives to decolonize our work and make a positive contribution to the reconciliation process. And to the land acknowledgement also, I would like to add a labor acknowledgement that we always put forward in our webinars from Do No Harm series. We also want to acknowledge the labor and sacrifices of poor and racialized workers on those lands. Canada's settler colonial history includes, among others, the exploitation of labor of over 200 years of enslaving African and Indigenous peoples, charging an immigration head tax on any person of Chinese origin, agricultural and other migrant workers indentured to their employers with closed work permits. So these and other violent practices allowed Canada to accumulate wealth and power. And Canada continues to profit from the historic and ongoing exploitation of poor and racialized people. And our network is deeply committed to redressing this legacy. Very quickly, some housekeeping items. As you know by now, of our other webinars, you will be muted, and the chat box also will be disabled for the presentation part. However, you still can message me with your questions and comments. And once our presenter is done today with her presentation, I will open the chat so you can ask your questions. As you know, we're going to record the session, and you're going to have the recording soon after the session finishes. And finally, we try to provide card captionings. Today we have card captionings at this webinar, and you can turn the closed caption option anytime you want. This is, as I said, the sixth webinar of the whole series, and we're going to talk about transgender identities and human trafficking. Very quickly, I will jump into our assumptions. As usually, we assume that we are already familiar with the topic of human trafficking and what anti-human trafficking work entails. We are here with good intentions because we want to learn more, and we understand that discomfort is part of our growth. And before I introduce Jayce, our speaker today, I want to take very quickly opportunity to say that June is a Pride Month, and I want to say Happy Pride Month to everybody. And we wish everyone joyful and safe month to celebrate. Also, we want to take this opportunity to say that beside the celebrations, Pride remain apolitical. And we know that the first Pride March was held in the 70s, and it was as the anniversary of the Stonewall riots, and it was a protest against the police brutality. So while today people are celebrating, and it's become an opportunity to celebrate your identity, we also want to acknowledge that we wish and we know that the Pride stays strong make a strong political stance. There are still a lot of human rights abuses happening to Canada, to LGBTQ plus communities, and there are countless countries around the world that being part of an LGBTQ plus community is punishable by is punishable either by death or other sentence. So happy Pride Month to everyone. And without overdue, I would like to introduce to you our today's presenter, Her name is Jayce Carver, and Jayce is a registered addiction counselor. She also is the founder and past CEO of the first transgender-led and operated Transgender and Family Health and Wellness Center in Canada. Jayce filed the first human rights application in Ontario against a treatment facility for denial of access to services based on gender identity. Jayce's passion for her work was born from her personal experience with addiction, homelessness, human trafficking, with little access to viable, equitable support and services. Jayce was creator of many peer therapeutic groups that linked to trans-inclusive services that she worked tirelessly to create with community partners. Beyond the creation of the center, Jayce created many trainings and education programs on equitable services to trans populations and delivered them to over 4,000 individuals across the province of Ontario. Jayce is credited with authoring many grants to create services that met the needs of her community. This included a tribal blazing grant to provide the first of its kind outpatient harm reduction trauma informed substance use program. This program was funded by the United Way and partnered with an addictions doctor to provide harm reduction services and support addictions counseling from peer supporters from queer and trans-focused psychotherapy. This program was designed to meet a person where they were at and allow the individual to define recovery for themselves. This provided the client with opportunity to move into paid peer support roles as well as opportunities for further education through Unemployment Ontario partnerships. Jay's strengths are public speaking, program development and assessment, public review and policy review and creation, facilities assessment, group and individual counseling that are culturally sensitive. Jayce has been mentioned for her work at Queen's Park and has given testimony at the House of Commons twice. Okay, Jayce, you have the floor. I'm stop sharing my screen here. So
Okay.
please feel free to begin.
Hey folks, my name is Jayce Carver. So I guess you heard a little bit, I use she, her pronouns. I guess you heard a little bit about the things I've done historically. This is my first public talk in over a year. And we're going to get to why that is. But first, I would like to explain about my gender identity. I identify as a trans woman. I'm also Métis, so I'm Indigenous. I think these are labels that are important for us to understand, to set a tone on why my life has unfolded kind of how it has. And so I'll just start with my transition story, and I guess we'll move on from there. So the first time I realized that I was a girl, I was 4 years old. And that's, if you look at scientifically, when youth start to unpack their gender identity, it is at around that age. Sexuality comes around puberty time. So I was raised in a Roman Catholic and Jehovah's Witness household. And so, I mean, if that doesn't fuck up a trans kid, I don't know what does, eh? So I was told by my mom at a very young age that the difference between boys and girls was penises and vaginas. And I thought, this bitch is crazy. She got no idea what she's talking about. I know who I am. But I learned in that moment that it was my job to become whatever it is she needed me to be loved and to be cared for and to be included in the family unit. So that's a lot of responsibility for a 4-year-old child to have. But when I look back at the story of my life today, I realized that was the moment that codependency was bred into me. We fast forward, because I want to get to the human trafficking stuff, right? So we fast forward through my childhood to the age of 11. My mom was married. Oftentimes, my mom's been married 4 times. So husbands 2 to 4 were always drug addicts, alcoholics, and sexual deviants. And so by the age of 11, I was being sexually assaulted by my stepfathers between then and 17 when I ran away from home. And I blamed my femininity as the reason why I was a victim of sexual assault as a child. I knew that I was so different and I was hyper aware of my differences. So often living in my head, often blaming myself for the traumas that took place in my life. I also learned at that age that my body was my only currency to safety. So if I was able to give what it is that they needed, I could keep myself safe from additional harm, such as beatings or withdrawal of food and other things that I might have needed to survive as a child. I met my now ex-husband at the age of 17 in the 90s. So I'm kind of aging myself, but we're not going to tell anybody, right, guys? It's between us in this room. So at the age of 17, I met my then husband, and he was kicked out of his home at the age of 15 for being gay, and had been living on his own. He was 18 when I met him, last semester of high school, and I thought, you know what? I'll just be gay. I mean, like, I'll just do the gay thing. I mean, Will and Grace was on TV. Ellen came out. I was like, everybody's being gay. I'm just going to be gay. And I thought at least I could be out and start to partner with somebody who I could have like as my teammate through life. But then and it took a long time to realize I was repeating the same pattern from my childhood and my adulthood in these adult relationships of trying to become whatever I needed to be accepted and loved and feel safe in a relationship, right? And so we went about trying to be grown-ups. We moved in together 2 weeks after we met, because that's what we do. He was really cute, guys. I had no choice. And so I met him. We moved in together, and I focused heavily on building a career because I figured if I could build a career and become successful, that some of these other feelings and thoughts would go away, right? The only trans people I saw in the public eye were on Jerry Springer, and they were pulling out each other's weaves, and I knew I didn't want to be that shit, right? I mean, I wanted to be a professional person in society. I wanted to have value. I had come from a very impoverished family home, and I wanted to change my own narrative and to have that family life I had craved so much in my childhood. I was willing to do anything to get it, even completely erase my own personal thoughts and feelings, right? And so I stayed in that marriage for a very long time. This year would have been 25 years together, and we're still best friends at this point in time. But I made a lot of concessions in my life. He was an addict, and an alcoholic. You gotta fall in love with what you know. I mean, like, that's what it was for me, right? I mean, the example of relationships was very unhealthy. So, I mean, I just thought it was normal, right? He was physically abusive for many of those years while he was using, and of course, I wanted every fight to be over in half an hour just so I can go back to living comfortably, right? I mean, survival was all I knew from a very early age. Fast forward, great career, loved everything I did. I had great jobs in management and always doing program development and things like that. In 2012, I decided that I needed to start to seek transition services. I started seeing a couple people in the queer community as I sat on the board of directors of our queer organization in Windsor, Essex. And I started seeing some trans people come out and starting to really embrace their identity. And I thought, and I was jealous as shit, I mean, I was just like, I want to do that, And so I figured I could at least look into it. And back in 2012, in order to get access to what I believe today to be life-saving medication to transition, you were required to have a diagnosis of a mental illness called gender dysphoria in order to access those medications. So I had to see a local psychiatrist who would diagnose me and then make a referral to CAMH in Toronto, which was the one-point access system for transition services. And so I, in secret, went to go seek out those services. And I unfortunately had a psychiatrist in Windsor, Essex that did not believe that transgender people existed. So I was diagnosed with adult ADHD and bipolar disorder. And I wanted her to be right, because all I knew of trans people was that they lost their jobs, they lost their family. I mean, they lost their partners. I mean, like, I had worked so hard to build this house of cards around me, all based on this image of a strong advocate gay male in the community and a family person and a businessman at the time, excuse me. And I just was like, I knew I was taking a risk. So when she said there was magic pills, I was like, sign me up. So I got high doses of Adderall and some other medications, and was told that she would see me in 6 months. I mean, I became addicted really quick. I mean, I liked to snort Adderall. It was a pretty good thing back then. I didn't realize I was an addict though till 2015. So, for, I was the last to know. So between 2012 and 2015, I had completely destroyed my life. By 2015, I was living in my car, doing sex work, because that was the most viable option for somebody who had started. Because at this point, I was able to get transition medication because the laws had changed. I was living in my car, doing sex work, and to support a crack cocaine habit. On sick leave from my social work job, and unable to figure out what I could do to support myself in getting help. Immediately when I realized that my weekends were starting on Wednesdays and I had to leave work, I realized that my drug problem was way bigger than I had ever imagined. And, you know, family members were starting to talk about it. My husband didn't much care, right? I mean, now he had a using partner. So he just cared I was taking all the drugs, right? So I went about looking for what options I had for treatment as a transgender person, early stages and hormone replacement therapy, very early stages, very awkward puberty phase, looking like a dude in a dress, you know. And I could say that, but you can't, you know. So I was looking for services, and what I found was, you know, I landed in detox. I was unable to get into women's detox because of the way that I looked. Even though in 2012 we adopted into the Human Rights Code gender identity as a basis for non-discrimination, I was being discriminated against, right? I had to prove I was female before I can get into a female bed. Since my health card was not female yet, and I didn't look like a woman, I wasn't able to get that bed, no matter how much I advocated for myself. And so I was put into male detox. It was one of the most horrifying experiences at that point in time I had lived through, because I was trying to be clean. And now I know I'm surrounded by men, and, you know, one of these boys just don't look like the other, right? I mean, like, there was some stuff going on clearly, and I became a target in the detox facility very quickly. So, I mean, I get discharged, I go right back to using, right? Some referrals have been made to treatment centers. And so I had a 3-month wait to get into treatment. I show up at a treatment facility after 3 months, Westover Treatment Center. I mean, I name names, eh? So here I am naming names. Westover Treatment Center, and there was nothing in my file that stated my gender identity as transgender, female or female. So when I get there on property and I'm given the tour, I'm brought right to the male dormitory, where I'm expected to sleep in a room with 4 other men. And I was like, in this moment I had it, eh? I was like, not gonna happen. I am married and I am a woman. So, like, this is not a thing I'm going to do. So I was ready to leave, but I also just didn't want to go to treatment. Let's be honest. I wanted to go back home and get high. So I said to them, I cannot be in this room. I am a transgender female. That should have been in my documentation. And I was treated as if I was a problem, creating a problem for the organization, right? So I had to meet with the director of programming that night and state my claim as female. And then the next day with the executive director, where I thank God my career path was always in advocacy work and around the Human Rights Code, right? So I knew the language to use, but I had to advocate and explain that from 2012 forward, you have a duty to accommodate me. And duty to accommodate means up to the point where you're going to bankrupt your organization. I mean, you're not going to bankrupt your organization by providing me a safe bed in treatment. And so their solution, which, I mean, was a solution that they could handle at the time, was to provide me in a bed in a building by myself. So there's the men's dorm, there's the women's dorm, and then there's the tranny dorm, right? Like, Me over there by myself on lockdown after 10 o'clock at night, no access to people, food, or any support, right? No way to contact anybody. And I mean, I really missed out on a lot of what the programming was intended to do for me. I mean, those connections that you make when you're in treatment with the other people who are on service are the things that carry you through after you are released from treatment, right? That shared lived experience that you have with another client is the most valuable thing you could provide to an addict. Anytime you tell a person who struggles with substance use disorder that they are different, they have an excuse to stay unwell. I mean, we need to feel a part of something greater than ourselves. And I know that that's been my route, my challenge to freedom has been to figure out ways in which I am the same as everybody else, right? So, I mean, I did that for 21 days. And I will say that I got one benefit from it. I got to spend a lot of time with myself for the first time in a long time. The outside world didn't mean anything to me while in there. I didn't have life's pressures. I didn't have family pressure from my husband, pressure from society, and I was able to really unpack what my gender identity meant to me fully. And I had this moment while there when I was getting ready to go to a group. I was only allowed to go to all gender groups, by the way, too, no women's groups. Where I looked in the mirror and I saw her looking back at me for the very first time in my life, fully looking back at me, and I knew that she could exist and deserve to. And so my mission when I left there was full force to just transition and embrace who I was. I would like to say that I got out of treatment in 2015 and I got clean, but unfortunately, that's not my story, and it's not many people's stories, right? I had sustained a lot of traumas that were not. I mean, no attention was paid to this. It was clearly just a 12-step OHIP bed where we don't focus on any psychotherapy or any trauma support. And the aftercare was lacking, we'll just say. Great treatment center, not bad messing them, because I'll tell you more about it later. And so I went about smoking crack and doing the things I did to support that crack habit, right? So, but I kept on trying to get help. I was in a 12-step program, and I started reaching out to a local treatment center, Brentwood Recovery Home, in Windsor, Ontario, and to try to get onto their 90-day program. And the executive director there at that time would not allow me to come. So what I was allowed, because of my trans status, okay, so what I was allowed to do was come weekly, enter in through the back door to go meet one-on-one with the female psychotherapist. I would not be considered part of the program. I would not be allowed to, at any alumni situations or go to any other groups. It was strictly one-on-one. And if I needed to have a smoke break, that also had to be done in the back of the building where no one was able to see me. And then I was also asked to return once a week to meet with him one-on-one, for him to look at me. Sorry, this one stings a little. For him to look at me and tell me if my hormones had had enough effect yet for me to come onto program. So essentially he was telling me that if I was pretty enough, I could come onto service. And so, I mean, I did it because it was the only kind of help I was able to access. But the narrative it gave to me was that I was never going to be pretty enough to be allowed to live. And that as long as I wasn't pretty, I must deserve to die. And eventually, I did that for months. And eventually in January, I attempted suicide, and by hanging. And I was found unresponsive in a closet in my home by my ex-husband, and then resuscitated, and then informed into the hospital. Gratefully, I was able to be resuscitated. I mean, there was more for me to do. Obviously, Creator had a plan for me. So when I went to the hospital, they discharged me back to Brentwood, and I showed up. I was told there was going to be a bed for me. I met with the executive director, who then denied me access to services for the last time. And I left there that day. He told me that I was not an addict, that I just didn't like myself. And I said to him that you have just described every person with substance use disorder. That is our major issue, is ourselves. Welcome to it. So I left and I called the Ontario Human Rights Board and I filed the first application for denial of access to services. That was really the first time in my recovery journey that I showed up for myself fully and said that something had to change. I continued to use. I was then kicked out of my family home again because my husband was just, at this point, he was clean. He got sober. I'm like, I don't fucking know how he did this shit, but he got sober. I'm still using, right? So he asked me to leave the house, and so I mean, my car was my home. I couldn't get into a shelter. That was part of the problem too. I mean, not equitably get into a shelter. I knew the risks of accessing shelter, which still exist in shelters today, and we'll talk about some of that stuff. And so I lived in my car, and I many trips to the hospital. I even had an ER doctor tell me that I just needed to seek Jesus and I would be better. And I'm like, I loves me some Jesus, but he's not taking the pipe out of my mouth, eh? So, I mean, that's going to have to be a me job, and I don't know how to stop because, all I saw, my worldview had changed so much since transition. I saw myself as a victim. I saw myself as a sex object and a fetish, because this is the narrative that we reinforce to trans people even to this day. I couldn't see that there could be any life beyond that for me. So, I mean, with facing that as my only options, I needed to be high in order to keep doing the things I needed to do to take care and support myself and to stay as safe as I knew how. So, I landed in detox again, and I was pretty enough to go at this point in 2016 to the women's bed. It was the first time I was able to access women's services, and so it was the first time I felt counted amongst the race of females in society. And I was in observation, and I saw these words across the top of the bed, and I thought, I'm sure they've been here for 25 years, but I was sure that creator put them there for me. I was meant to see these words in that day, and those words were, out of all the things you could be in the world, just be yourself. And that message rang true with me that day. And then I got a call just before discharge that I was going to be admitted directly into the women's treatment program as the first trans woman to go back to Westover. They realized the error of their ways and were inviting me back to be fully included in dorms with the women. And that changed everything for me. I mean, service delivery as me, without having to explain who I was, without having to answer questions about what my body parts were, which I've had to do a lot of times, without any of those abrasive questions that we still think that as service providers, sometimes we need to ask out of safety for our other clients or safety for even the trans person accessing service, right? Things that are arbitrary to healthcare delivery or service delivery. So I was able to go back and fully participate, and I got clean. And I stayed clean for a long while. I stayed clean, and then my driving force, it was my driving force to create the first trans health and wellness organization in Canada. And it started with me just getting out and getting a 1-800 number started, because I knew that I wanted to know I had a responsibility now as a sober woman with a social work background to make sure that nobody ever had to go through the system the way that I had to go through the system, that they had ease of access, that I had already known some service providers that were starting to do it right as a result of their interaction with me, right? And so I did this 1-800 number, and trans people started calling it. And I was like, what the fuck is going on here? So I started meeting with them all over Windsor-Essex County, wherever they were comfortable. And I just wanted them to know that there was life after whatever they were doing, and that I was an example of that, and like, look at what I'm doing. You don't forget about what society's telling you, forget about what you think you're supposed to be, forget about how you think you're supposed to look. That transition is a journey of self-expression and self-exploration, and not to let anybody rob you of that journey, and to create our own narratives and to create what it is that we want our own outcomes to be, and to stop letting other people decide for us how well we get to be, how educated we get to be, and the level of employment that we get to have, that we get to decide those things, right? And I would connect them to services. But then the numbers of people starting to call started to increase very quickly. And so I started developing some programs. The first one was Transspectrum. It was a peer facilitated group therapy, non-formal therapy that we had. And it was just about getting together as trans people so that we had a sense of community and connection. Because when you feel like you belong to something, I mean, the sky can be the limit, right? When you have other people lived experience around you, I mean, your narrative starts to change. And then the other one was I was realizing that, you know, my husband was really struggling with my trans identity and what it meant for him as a gay man. So I created a program that he co-facilitated for years called T2 Families in Transition. Recognize that face. T2 Families in Transition. And that was to help family members, right? And as peers started to gain traction in their own lives and get some support, they became the facilitators, and we were able to back out of that stuff a little bit more. So that was in 2016. I became a formal organization in 2017, federally incorporated as a non-for-profit organization. It was called Windsor Essex Transgender and Allied Support at the time. We had our first physical space immediately in the core of Windsor downtown. It was a shitty 1,000 square foot space, but I loved it. A lot of great stuff happened there. And then there was a lot of call for me to create training programs. And so I started creating training programs like Trans 101, mental health and addictions, transitioning in the workplace, best practices, policing around trans individuals. I would work with Windsor Police on specific cases, but not provide training. We're going to work on that now. And so these things I started delivering these things across the province. I've trained over 4,000 individuals on trans inclusivity and equity and service provision. And I've worked with companies like the beer store EAP reps for their union, working on documents and, to make sure that they are providing services by best practices. The county of Renfrew brought me in. I trained the whole county of Renfrew, all social work departments and addiction services. Hotel du Grace Healthcare Hospital was one of my big contracts. And I trained their staff in many of their departments. And then Air Canada was like, I was like, what? Air Canada? So we did some work with Air Canada. And then spoke at the House of Commons twice, right? I couldn't believe how much my life had changed in such a short period of time. And then I did not know I was going to be mentioned at Queen's Park. I was just asked to watch it. And then my name was on it, and I was like, shit, this is the thing. A lot of pressure comes along with that. I want to say that, eh? I mean, when you become a public figure in a marginalized community, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of work that comes along with that. To the degree that, like, you know, my own recovery started to suffer. I was put on a pedestal. I will never be put on a pedestal again. I mean, that's why my new company is a for-profit and I don't work for a board. I say the shit that I want to say because that's the shit you need to hear. Amen. Like, there's no more censoring Jayce Carver. So because of that censoring, and when my marriage split up in 2019 as a result of my transition after 20 something years of marriage, I was not allowed to release that to the public. And so I had to pretend to still be married for the optics to the community, because we had a family group, and then the board would control what the narrative around my divorce was, right? And when my husband left, I made a choice that I have to live with, to pick up drugs again. And that's how we moved to more current day, right? So this happened in 2019. I struggled because the relapse, I felt really guilty about it because I was being looked up to by trans youth, by community partners. I'd put all this pressure on myself to be the perfect trans woman, which is, by the way, there's no perfect anything. I mean, I'm just a human being today, and I'm really grateful for that. So the perfect trans woman in the public eye, and put all this responsibility on myself that I had such guilt and shame around picking up drugs. And that guilt and shame drove me to more drug use. And that more drug use led me to sexual exploitation, right? And I don't call things human trafficking. I mean, I think when we talk about human trafficking, we're looking at the little white girl who's been stolen from her bed in her family home in suburbia and she's being pimped out of a hotel. Now that shit happens, and I get it. But human trafficking takes so many different forms. When I was unwell and still trying to work as a CEO of a company, trying to hide this shit, I mean, I had engaged in situations with men that were clearly human trafficking. I was having live feeds created of me in sexual acts while under the influence and then being blackmailed. So already they're getting paid for the live feed, and then the blackmail comes where I have to pay them off or they're going to expose me in the community. And I think about all the other community partners, the youth, all these things that are at risk if this is found out, instead of thinking about my own well-being, right? I had gone to the board seeking treatment, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to I'm not going to say anything bad about that right now. I mean, we're going to figure that out later. And so, I mean, I did that till 2020, right? I mean, in January, in January 2020, I finally was like, enough, I'm leaving. I don't work here right now. I need to go take care of myself before I get killed. Because I had a very violent sexual assault, and that I had survived. And I was like, I got to do something. Someone's going to kill me. You know, I mean, I got to do something. And so I got back into treatment in March of 2020, got out, started, and I was expected to return to work immediately. And on the first day of work, I had to do a press release explaining that I had been the victim of a sexual assault. I mean, I had no control over what I was ready to say and not ready to say at the time. And almost immediately, I started using again, trying to balance work and life. And then, I mean, I was the last one to figure out I was that I was a victim of human trafficking too, right? And I mean, I think my childhood set the tone for that, right? I was so groomed as a child of a survivor of sexual trauma that I had met this guy when I had gotten back out of treatment and things were shitty. And by the way, in an abusive marriage for many years. So, I mean, relied very much on my husband to create my narrative. I mean, now I was with this guy who convinced me he loved me. I wanted to believe that shit. And next thing you know, him and 5 of his friends are living in my house. And I'm being kept high while still going to work as the CEO of a company and being pimped out and shared amongst folks to keep his business going, right? And me believing that this is my fault, I'm dirty, I'm wrong, and if I just could put down the crack pipe, this wouldn't be happening to me. They were never going to let me put down the crack pipe. That's the truth. I mean, there was no choice once I started. It was done, and they were happy to keep me high because I was bringing in a lot of money. The thing about trans women, we bring in 4 times the income that a cisgender woman will bring in for sex exploitation. 4 times. We're also the stats show that we are 76% of the trans community has addiction issues. So we're already a greater target in that area. And 77% of our population faces homelessness. And so because we need safe places to go to, we're willing to go do the things we got to do to stay housed, regardless of the consequences to our personal safety and ourselves. I mean, that's where I ended up. That's exactly where I ended up. The difference was I knew who to call. So when I was finally able to get a hold of my phone one day when it was left near me, I called Shelly. And Shelly was, Shelly was a colleague of mine. It took so much of me to make that first call because I was so embarrassed about where I had let my life go. But I knew that she was one of the facilitators of the human trafficking program at Legal Assistance Windsor. And I wasn't 100% sure I was being trafficked, but I had a feeling maybe I was. So I made that phone call. And pretty quickly, we got me out of the situation. We had the human trafficking department of the police respond. I was staying at my mother's house in safety for a little bit until we could make sure that my home was cleared for safety. who started the process of preparing me to go to a trauma and addiction center that was funded by, who was it? The Attorney General? Shelley? Girl, you're still muted.
Through VQRP.
Okay, so through that, eh? So, and because I had the privilege of working as an executive in our community, I had an easier time accessing services without having to explain who I was first. That is still not the norm for trans identified people. So I don't want you to think that it is, eh? I mean, as long as a document or an intake document says man, woman, trans woman, other, we do not have equitable services in Ontario. I mean, until a cisgender person has as much responsibility to identify as cisgender, and we normalize that language so that we know you're cisgender, it is not equitable services. You're asking us to do something outside of what the rest of society is expected to do. But I will say that my accessing services with Shelley was like, let's get it started, eh? And that they had some narrative already. I had done a lot of training in Windsor Essex as well. And I think I had sat down with CLO and legal assistants of Windsor prior to this happening and provide a small lunch and learn 101 training. So they had some training already. Okay, thank you for putting that in the chat, Varka. And so, I mean, I was accessing the services at a place that I had already provided lunch and learn, right? So it was pretty easy to access those services. Of course, you know, I'm still using drugs at the time and can't get it together. And now I realized that I had actually been through this trauma, and I'm sitting with it every day, and I'm getting great services, counseling services through Shelley and through Robin at Legal Assistance of Windsor. I'm getting great day-to-day support. They have no expectation. They're doing things harm reduction style, eh? Because they don't. As much as I lied to them and told them the pipe was down, they didn't. I know that they knew it was not true. So, I have no guilt around that today. I mean, it kept me alive and from killing myself until I could get the help that I needed, right? So, I went into treatment. It was an amazing treatment experience. Unfortunately, I don't believe it was long enough. It was only 30 days. With that kind of substantial trauma, you need longer term treatment, but some of that work had been done. I came home to the same environment, same apartment, same everything that all this stuff had taken place in. And right before getting into treatment, I actually, I was the victim of an attempted murder and a rape. Not by my trafficker, but by somebody who was known to my trafficker. You know, I had become a target, and my getting away made them very, very angry. And so I want to share something with you that I wrote. How much time do I got, Varka? I mean, like, I'm a big talker, right? Too bad.
Yes, you have 10 minutes. Go, and if the questions and answers go further than 3 o'clock, okay. I hope that people can stay.
10 minutes? No. Okay. So
15 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, so I wrote a poem while in trauma. Well, it's just a piece of writing, not even a poem. While in the addiction center, that ended up getting published in an international academic journal after I left, and I'm going to share it with you because this is me coming to understand what had happened to me. Because I hadn't, even getting into treatment, I had no real understanding of the fact that I had been trafficked. And that this was not my fault, or even that the attempted murder was not my fault. I blamed my body. I blamed the way that I looked. I blamed my drug use. And I did that for a long time, even after leaving treatment. So this piece is called Director's Cut. Freak show, tranny, ladyboy, ugly, fat, whore, diseased, crazy, crackhead, junkie, dirty, fuck girl, chick with a dick. The pipe fills with white smoke as she creates the silence in her head. Hold on, I need to be able to see this big. How do I do that? Okay, the silence in her head that deafens the things she calls herself. She floats above herself like an angel, waiting to take her home, where she doesn't have to feel the things that they've done to her or the things that she's done to herself. The smoke always clears, the feeling always returns, and the men start to line up again, waiting to play their role in her fucked up film called Self-Destruction. As she lays in fear, she waits for the director to yell cut, but he never does. His face and name keeps on changing, but she always stays the same. But that's the way they want it. Always the punchline, always the victim, but never the hero. But all she had to do was change the channel. So that was a piece that I had wrote in treatment. And I mean, because I have to close and I'm rushing now, I'm going to read you. So just recently we went to court for the attempted murder trial, and he was found guilty of lesser charges, but I charged this person. And I mean, going through that process of charging a person and trying to move on and rebuild my life. I mean, I'm there now. Hey, I've done it. I believe I have arrived again into a moments of self-acceptance and success. And so this was, and I believe that when I typed the last word on this letter, I was free of this. And so I'm going to share this letter that I read to the predator in court. Every day for a year and a half, I had thought of what I would say to you if given the opportunity. The truth is, I don't know if any words could even shed an ounce of light on the nightmare that began with meeting you. I think to really grasp what I lost, you need to understand who I was to people. Let's start with the basics. I was a wife for 23 years. I was someone's daughter, and my mom used to be very proud of that. Sorry, this one's still fresh, eh? I was a sister, a friend, an auntie, and a mentor. Many of these things have been lost, but hopefully only temporarily. I was also the founder and CEO of Canada's first health and wellness center that was ran for transgender people by transgender people. I started this company from the ground up when people told me that I couldn't or wouldn't. I was a public figure. I did TV work, public speaking across the province, and even was invited by the ministers to speak at the House of Commons twice. I used to live fully and mostly happily. I used to look at the world as tough with a lot of opportunities to spread love. I was a storyteller, a medicine woman, a healer. I looked at my life as having purpose with a responsibility to others like me to no longer live in the shadows and embrace their differences. I did this with a strength clearly not of my own, but divinely inspired. I'm also not perfect. I'm a recovering addict, which also means I used to speak publicly about that. COVID caused a very high relapse rate amongst people with long-term sobriety. I'm not immune to that, and unfortunately, that's how I met you. A split decision I've been beating myself up for long enough. I allowed this small piece of the puzzle to make me responsible for your actions. Surviving something like this does something to a person, something I'm sure only time and practice can heal. I have lived the last year and a half in poverty. I walked away from my company, my role in the community, my family, my home, my support system, all out of fear. I could not heal where I felt threat was imminent. I have lived in my car, couch surfed, and currently live in substandard housing, but I'm grateful for it because I've worked hard to gain some recovery and I'm moving in the right direction. Things I used to take for granted, such as trusting people, sleep, family, personal safety, hanging out with friends, require work today. I had to practice going to a friend's house last week. I was able to do it for an hour and a half. I used to be a very social person. I used to view myself as capable, loving, kind, included. You made me a victim and left me with the work of becoming a survivor. The thing with the most value that you took from me was time. It is the only thing in life that we can't work hard to regain. Once it's gone, it's gone. My mom is terminally ill, and I have not been able to spend time with her out of fear for my family's safety. I also spent too many days blaming myself, unable to get out of bed, unable to look at my body because I blamed it for the reason why you hurt me. I couldn't close my eyes at night without seeing your face and reliving the experience. I had to go to a trauma and addiction center. I attend CAMH Indigenous Services for addiction services and psychiatric support because I now require medication for depression and a very high sense of anxiety and fear. I see a trauma transgender counselor weekly to manage the abusive thoughts that come from surviving such a horrific event. All of this has gone on for long enough. By waiting for this to go to trial, you have extended the time that this has been a part of my life. While this is going on, it is impossible to heal and move forward because it is still happening. I pray that this is the moment that is no longer happening. This is the moment it becomes over, something that happened, something I can give myself freedom from. On November 20th, every year, worldwide, my community recognizes the lives lost to violent crimes. I survived, but many don't. Those who do survive blame themselves and their transness for the reason it happened. I even did. You see, I never forgot what the Creator sent me to this planet to do. My mission on this planet is to heal by using my experiences to inspire others to create change in their own lives. We are here because it is not yet normal for people like me to hold people accountable for violence. Today, I reclaim my life. I reclaim my voice, and I use it on behalf of the many who we've lost too soon and those who are too afraid to speak. I have a responsibility, and I will return to that I've been called to do. I am a writer who only writes what I connect to, and I've been too afraid to connect to this out of fear of having to actually feel it. I gave away my voice to you and my passions to you. You have become my greatest excuse. Today, I understand that you only own one moment of my life, and I get to decide the rest. As a person in 12-step recovery, I am told that I must have empathy for the still suffering addict, even those who have hurt me. So I want you to know I understand you are suffering. And like with all addicts, I pray you find recovery. The steps teach me that I will never gain true recovery as long as I have resentment in my heart. I need to clear this because I want to live freely. So I'm going to say something to free myself of you once and for all. I do forgive you, but I will never forget. When this is all over, I will return to all the parts of me that I used to love. I will participate with my family. I will return to the kind of work that I love. I will choose to see beauty in the world and in people. I will laugh again. I will love freely and also inwardly. And most of all, I will heal. So in that moment, I was free. But this process, I mean, dealing with victim witness, I was lucky because I had already worked with them. I think one of the biggest challenges was a bit with the Crown, and he was very open to learning, but we should not be asking trans people who are in the midst of going through a trauma to teach them things. I had to tell the Crown attorney, who's a great guy, that the trans defense is an actual thing that people can enact in our country, and we need to be ready for it. This guy could say that he didn't know I was trans when he was trying to have sex with me, and so that violence was because he went crazy, right? I mean, that's a thing that can still be used in Canada right now. We're trying to abolish it, but it can still be used. But I shouldn't have been in a position to have to teach that. But because I've always been a community teacher, I mean, I had no problem doing that. You know, today I live my life fully again. I have friends. I'm a part of my family, although from a distance because I had to move communities. I work in adult protection, and I have now launched a company again to do these consulting things with organizations called, my company name is Carver Consulting. We're a new organization with community leaders from across healthcare and social work sector in order to make sure that organizations are not expecting a trans person to have to either indulge them with inappropriate questions or to have to be their educator during service delivery. You should never be asking a person to educate you during service delivery. So I think that's all the time I have, unfortunately, because I could talk to you guys for another week if you'd like. But the solution, look at your forms. Look at the way you're doing things. Reach out to my organization for consulting. Bring us in to do some education and training. I mean, the solutions are available and in front of you. We just have to want to use them, right? So, miigwech for the opportunity, and I'm really grateful that I got to do that today, do this with all of you today.
Jayce, thank you so much for being unique, for being you, for being genuine, for being strong, for being amazing. Thank you so much. I know it takes a lot from you to tell the story. Oh, did we lose Jayce?
No, she's still there.
Oh,
She's
my connection.
frozen. She is frozen.
Oh, she's frozen. Yeah, my connection. I thought that is my connection.
I'll text her.
Yeah, text her. Huh? Yeah, yes, you're here. Yeah, for a moment you were frozen, so I was we were panicking. So, but thank you so much for being genuine, and thank you so much for taking this huge burden to be the light of everyone else in your path and looking for services and supports from trans community. I want to open right away because we don't have time. And for sure, we already talked with you that we're gonna have continuation of this webinar. We're gonna be together more often online if you can. So I want to open the floor for questions. Please feel free to send your questions via chat. I'll try to monitor. I know that many people are saying thank you and thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for being an amazing person. Please feel free. Yeah, Melanie is saying thank you so much for sharing. What a powerful, human, and genuine and hopeful story. So there's one question here. So the question is how we can access to the recording of the webinar. Yes, I will send the webinar recording right away. Not right away, but you will receive the webinar recording. There are lots of people expressing their thanks. And Jayce, you when we talked beforehand, you also talked around. You mentioned around you talked about your privilege, and that because of your privilege, like you understand your privilege, and you know that somebody else in your position may not have what you access. So can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so because you know, I've been able to afford a couple things, and like boobs, you know, I mean, and they used to not historically be covered by OHIP for trans women, and even now there's a requirement, right? You have to have less than 1 millimeter of breast growth in order to access OHIP funding for breast augmentation. But I had the resources at the time in order to get breast augmentation. I was also, so that makes me kind of like have a little bit more passing privilege is what we would call it in the trans community. I also kind of just look like an older European woman. This sounds like I've been smoking like fucking 5 packs a day, right? So, I mean, so I get a little bit more passing privilege there. But also, I was so connected to community partners and so well known for the work that I had done. That, I mean, I was able to even jump wait lists on some things. You know, I mean, most of our community does not get to do that. I mean, I took advantage of my privilege, and I'm not gonna lie about it. I did. I mean, I needed help, right? But at the same time, I think you had it right when we talked about pride being a political statement, right? I mean, until for me, the way I look at pride, and I actually stopped a pride parade in Windsor, Essex one year on the top of a pickup truck and made everybody sit, because I mean, no pride parade, like no pride party until the most marginalized of our voices are elevated to the top. So, I mean, when we think about trans women of color, which I am one, I'm a Métis, but I'm white passing, right? I mean, trans women of color are visible and their voices are heard. There should be no pride. As long as we, I mean, not just pride. I mean, we got to stop just celebrating it. We have to make it political again. We have to make this about a movement. It was started by a Black trans woman at Stonewall, and then we forgot trans people existed until we were federally protected in 2017, and it became trendy. I mean, like, I'm not a trend, eh? I'm a human being that faces injustice on a regular basis, and there's more injustices when you have an intersecting identity such as being Indigenous or a person of color or having a visible disability. I mean, these things are, or even age, you know, age. So when we start looking at intersecting identities, we see that there's less and less privilege the more intersecting identity that you have, right? And I think we have to remember that. And I'm aware of my privilege. And so I use my voice, and like when I'm on TV, I always try to elevate the voice of somebody else who is more marginalized than I am. And I have a show starting in September on Rogers TV Barrie that I'll be co-hosting ongoing. And it is to bring the most marginalized of our community onto TV and provide them a platform to say their truth. It's called Let's Be Perfectly Queer with Randy Davis and Jayce Carver.
And if you have something already, like a link or something we can share with people, I know that you sent us few links to previous episodes, and we're gonna share them with people after the webinar.
Yes, so those shows, that is the show is being retooled to bring me on as a permanent guest. Okay.
Okay, so there is one question, and I hope people can stay a few minutes after 3 o'clock. There is one question. Somebody's asking: before you were trafficked, did you already know about human trafficking?
I did, because I mean, when I was an agency lead, CEO, I mean, I worked closely with Shelley to have a better understanding of human trafficking as it relates to our own clientele. There was a couple actually. Do you remember when you did the huge release for? I can't remember. The police were there. We were all at a hotel or some shit, and there was a presentation, and I actually challenged in that moment that we don't have numbers for trans people. We're not counted, and we should be, because there's no resources, but we're 4 times more likely to be trafficked than cisgender people. And so I challenged at that point, and that's when I was actually offered to be brought in to do training with their organization. And so yes, I was aware of human trafficking. I mean, I just didn't recognize it was happening in my own life. I had blamed myself, right, for my drug use, and yeah.
You know, do you think that now, with more visibility around human trafficking, services have improved, specifically around transgender community?
No. I mean, I think they're going to do it right in Windsor, Essex, right? I mean, I know they're going to do it right in Windsor, Essex. I mean, I mean, I've worked alongside Shelley. Shelley's like one of my best girlfriends, and she's helped save my life. And I know that they're doing it right. They're doing it right, eh? Sorry. I just love you, Shell.
So there's another,
But no, like out here in Barrie, there's no narrative, eh? So I mean, I'm in like Wasaga, Simcoe County now, and I service in Barrie and stuff. So I mean, I've just reached out to OPP because it's actually the police department alone that is running with victim services, that's running the human trafficking out here. And I've reached out to them because they've had no training or narrative around trans identities out here, and I'm trying to land that as a contract out here because it's so necessary.
So there's another, so somebody's saying, is there a way to contact Jayce? Thank you, Jayce.
Yes.
As a fellow Indigenous woman and human trafficking survivor, I am so sorry that many of the institutions failed you. Your strength is incredible. Thank you for sharing your voice.
So through my website link, you could also, on my website, you have an email address that you could email me at, but it's jaycecarver2@gmail.com. So if anybody needs, can we put that in the chat?
And maybe not now because I have only one screen, but I will. But when I send out the recording, we're gonna put everything, your website, the resources that you shared with us, and everything will be over there.
Great.
So there is another question. Maybe this will be the last question. What was helpful for you when trying to exit safely the situation you were in?
What was important to me? Sorry,
what was helpful for you when trying to exit safely the situation you were in?
I had to look for opportunity first, right? I mean, like there was always somebody watching me. And I mean, this one day there was no one watching. My car key was left there. It was like a big idiot day for them, right? Like my car key was left there. My cell phone was left there. Immediately, I mean, I was constantly looking for opportunities to leave. And like this one day creator lined everything up, right? And so I grabbed that car key, grabbed my cell phone. I didn't wait to make the call in my house. I left and I called, and then I stayed at my mom's while I waited for services and everything with Shelley. But I was able to call her directly. Like I had Shelley's phone number, right? I mean, I didn't have to. And that's another thing. I have her cell phone number, right? I mean, I didn't have to go through an agency line, right? I tried to make a call a couple other times. In those months, I'm sure you remember, Shelley, and I was like, and then I backed out. I would admit to the drug use, and then I was like, no, not a thing, and I would just stay because like I was afraid to leave, right? I was afraid of what would happen to my family if I left. I was afraid of what would happen to me. Like I would probably be killed, right? And I almost was killed. So I was afraid of those things. But I mean, once I finally admitted to what was actually happening, things started to move very quickly. But I had to actually have Shelley assure me that they could make sure that I was safe through I needed a great social worker to make sure I knew that I could do this. I could be empowered to do this, that I was not at fault, and that I wasn't alone doing this. Not being alone doing this was the biggest power move, right? I mean,
but I don't think it's unusual for people to do incremental to us, right? Like, you
Yeah.
know, I think you've got a lot on the line when you're coming forward to any of us here in this meeting today, right? So, you know, being prepared to let people come in incrementally, right? And learn that you are, I think, somewhat trustworthy, I hope, right? And then people will say, so it means taking the time that people deserve to have in order to come forward with their story.
And I will say, as a survivor of this form of trauma, and I will never use the term victim anymore. Like I just don't like the term. I've survived these things. I'm a powerful woman. And that, like, I mean, like I have rebuilt my life inside of this last year, right? So I'm not a victim of anybody's. So I will say that there's moments throughout that healing journey that you almost start to romanticize your assailant, your victimizer, right? I mean, you almost feel pulled back in no matter how far you are, right? Because you want to feel that when you're on your own, you want to feel that sense of belonging to something and safety again, no matter, even though it sounds fucked up and crazy, right? But I mean, there was those moments along the way. But I'm grateful to be on the other side of that now, right? And to really have a full understanding of what kind of manipulation they used and grooming that they use, and why I thought, and not blame myself for the way that I thought. I mean, I now I can recognize a thought and be like, man, it's just a thought, eh? No big deal. I mean, it doesn't mean it's like my actual belief system, you know?
So once again, Jayce, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for sharing with us your amazing story, your ups and downs, and and your humanity. Thank you. And I wanted to say that this is the last webinar of our series, and please expect from us to connect with you at some point later in the year, because we're gonna continue the conversation for sure. Thank you so much, and thank you for being here. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.